The sun beat down on the endless Texas plains, painting the horizon in gold and fire as a lone rider moved slow across the barren land. His name was Colt McGraw, known to some as the Lonely Cowboy, a man carved by the wind, the dust, and the silence of forgotten trails. Life hadn't been kind. He'd lost his family to the fever, his ranch to the bank, and his trust in people to betrayal. He rode with only a battered hat shading his weathered face and a guitar strapped across his back, singing songs only the coyotes and the stars would hear. One evening, as he stopped at a half-abandoned town, he noticed something strange. A little flower shop tucked between two boarded-up buildings, its door hanging crooked, its sign faded, and yet, in the window, a single rose stood in a chipped vase. He dismounted and pushed the door open, the bell tinkling weakly like it hadn't rung in years. Behind the counter was a girl, no older than 20, with eyes like twilight and hair tangled from neglect. She looked at him as though she didn't expect anyone to come. Her name was Rose. Folks in town whispered she was cursed, unwanted, abandoned by kin and left behind like the shop she lived in. But the cowboy saw something else, an echo of his own loneliness. A spirit left to wither, but still standing. He tipped his hat and spoke soft. Even a forgotten rose is still beautiful. She blinked at him, not sure whether to trust, but her lips trembled with the hint of a smile, the first in years. For nights after, Colt would stop by, sometimes strumming his guitar, sometimes telling stories of trails she'd never seen, mountains high and deserts wide. Rose, who had been ignored her whole life, began to bloom under his words. The townsfolk laughed, saying the cowboy was wasting time on a girl nobody wanted. But Colt had lived enough to know the worth of something rare. What others threw away was often the treasure a man was born to find. The forgotten rose began to lift her head, and the lonely cowboy felt something stir inside him he thought was gone forever. Yet shadows always lurk where light grows. A rival rancher, known as Briggs, had his eyes on the land under Rose's shop, planning to tear it down for his own gain. When he saw the cowboy standing by her side, he spat. "You think a worthless girl and a washed-up drifter can stand against me?" Colt's hand tightened on the reins, his heart caught between fight and flight. But one thing he knew, he wasn't leaving her to be forgotten again. Not this time. He'd ride through fire before he let that happen. And that's where our tale begins, folks. If you're feeling the stir of this cowboy's journey, don't just ride off. Stick with us, subscribe, and let's ride deeper into the story of love, grit, and the bloom of a forgotten rose. Morning came with storm clouds rolling low, and the town seemed to hold its breath. Colt stood outside the flower shop, boots planted firm, eyes sharp as steel. He wasn't the kind of man to chase trouble, but when trouble came for someone who finally mattered, he wasn't about to run. Inside, Rose watched from the window, her hands trembling as she clutched the single red rose Colt had given her the night before. "You ain't forgotten no more," he'd told her. And those words had lit something inside her stronger than fear. Briggs and his hired men rode in, spurs jangling, rifles slung over shoulders, their faces twisted with the arrogance of men who thought power was theirs by right. "Step aside, cowboy," Briggs sneered. "This girl ain't worth the dirt her shop stands on." The cowboy's voice was low, steady as thunder before it breaks. "She's worth more than you'll ever know." Then it began, dust flying, fists swinging, gun barrels flashing in the rising dawn. The cowboy fought like a man with nothing left to lose, but everything left to protect. Each punch he took, he remembered the years he'd been alone. Each strike he gave, he remembered the promise he made to himself, that no one would take the light from Rose again. Rose, shaking, stepped outside despite the danger. Her voice rang out like a bell in the storm. "Enough. For the first time, she stood tall before the men who mocked her, her spirit no longer hidden. Briggs faltered at the sight not of her fists, but of her fire. The townsfolk, drawn by the commotion, gathered and one by one turned against Briggs, who had ruled by fear too long. With his pride shattered, he spat on the ground and rode out, swearing vengeance but beaten in more ways than one. When the dust settled, Colt turned to Rose, his hat tilted low to hide the emotion in his eyes. She held the rose he'd given her, petals trembling but unbroken, just like her. "You're not forgotten, Rose," he whispered. "Not anymore." In that moment, under the gray sky breaking into sunlight, the town no longer saw her as the cursed girl. They saw her as a woman reborn, and the cowboy by her side as the man who believed when no one else would. From then on, the flower shop became a place of life again. The air filled with the scent of blooms, and Rose was no longer the forgotten one. She was the heart of the town. And Colt, though restless as any cowboy, found himself returning not just to the shop, but to her. The lonely cowboy had found his Rose, and the forgotten Rose had found her cowboy. And so their story rides on, not in the silence of sorrow, but in the music of love and grit. Folks, if you felt the ride, if your heart stirred with the dust and bloom of this tale, don't just pass by like the strangers in the story. Hit that subscribe button, join this cowboy trail, and let's ride together into more stories of heart, hope, and the wild unknown.